Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. I'm your host, Andrew Langer. Appreciate you joining us today. Listen, if you're watching us on YouTube, you can check us out on just about every podcast platform that is out there. And if you're listening to us on one of those fine podcast platforms, you want to see what we're doing here on the Lunch Hour, go and check out our YouTube page. Please subscribe to us, leave us a like, leave us a comment, and more importantly, let your friends, let your family members, let your friends' family members, let your family members' friends know all about what we're doing here at the Lunch Hour Podcast. Joining us today, I'm really excited to bring this guest on. His name is Tom Jankovsky. He's a commissioner from Garfield County, Colorado. He's a third-generation native Coloradan in his fourth term as a commissioner in Garfield County. He's on the public lands planning. He is the public lands planning lead for the Board of County Commissioners, currently working on the Greater Sage Grouse SEIS. That's a supplemental environmental impact statement for all of you out there. And the Biden administration's 30 by 30 initiative. We're going to talk about that. During his tenure, he's also served as the board liaison to the Garfield County Human Services Commission, the Garfield County Economic Roundtable, and the Garfield County Latino Community Commission. He's a member of the Garfield County Clean Energy Board, the county's Investment Advisory Board, the Budget Committee, the vice chair of the Intermountain Transportation Region, and the Bureau of Land Management's Northwest Colorado Regional Advocacy Council. He's a former general manager of Sunlight Mountain Resort in Glenwood Springs. He was inducted in the Colorado Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame in 2012. We got to ask him about that. And he received his Bachelor of Science degree from Pacific University in Oregon. Commissioner, welcome to the show. So glad you can join us today.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for that introduction.
So let's talk about Garfield County. Where is it? How big is it? How much federal land is there? Tell us all about it.
Okay, well, Garfield County is in west central Colorado. We're, I think, the seventh largest county in Colorado, about 3,000 square miles of land, which is about 1.9 million acres, I believe.
Okay.
And we go from what's the Glenwood Canyon, for people that are familiar with Colorado, all the way to the Utah border. Our county seat is Glenwood Springs. We have 6 municipalities, a population of about 60,000 roughly, and it's grown a little bit with the immigrants that have come into our county.
Sure.
Just like all of the United States. We are in the eastern side of our county. We're primarily tourism driven. We have the Glenwood Springs is home to the world's largest hot springs pool. Oh, yeah. We have another hot springs pool here as well. We have rafting, skiing, biking, and all those other amenities. So really a tourism base in the east end of our county, and then the west end of our county is natural resources primarily.
Yes.
We are home to the Piceance Basin, which has the second largest natural gas reserves in the United States. So that's extremely important for us, especially when it comes to property taxes. About half of our property taxes, almost $24 million, come from oil and gas production. And so that is very important to us. We have about 11,000 active wells in our county. So 62% public lands. It's pretty evenly split between the Bureau of Land Management and U.S. Forest Service. Of the Forest Service's lands, about 200,000 acres are the Flat Tops Wilderness Area.
Okay.
That was put in during the Wilderness Act of 1974.
Tom, let me interrupt you for a second, because I got to tell you something. And you and I were talking before the show, and I'd spent some time out in Garfield County over the summer, had just a great time. I got to tell you, driving on the road and seeing those flat tops off in the distance, obviously Glenwood Canyon is dramatic. Yes. It is a dramatic canyon to drive through, folks. If you haven't gone out, go out there, and it is amazing to see. But the flat tops, when you see them off in the distance, I want to spend some time up there, because that is also just as dramatic. I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
No, you're correct. The flat tops are just that. They're a high mesa at about 10,000 feet, and there's probably 100 small lakes up there, old timber, also big meadows, great wildlife viewing, especially not wildlife, wildflower view and wildlife, but wildflower viewing in July when the combines come out and the paintbrushes and all the other wildflowers. So it's a beautiful area. Bring your mosquito repellent when you're
sure. That's always a thing, and I'm a magnet for mosquitoes. But it's interesting because my dad has a PhD in mineralogy, and I took a little bit of an interest when I was a kid in this, and this is going to, by the way, lead into where I want to go to next with natural gas. But you go out there and you're hard pressed if you're someone who grew up, being raised by essentially a geologist, to not sort of take a deep and abiding interest in the geologic features that are there. So it was, you look at it and you think, how was this created? What were the processes that are involved? What kind of rocks are there? So anyway, not that I want to get off track, that leads me into this. So when we're talking about the second largest natural gas depository in the country, are those wells on private land? Are they on public land? Or are they on some mixture of the two of them?
They are primarily on private land.
Okay, good.
And that is because it's so much easier. Well, it used to be easier to drill on private land. Yeah, okay. With our current governor, he's put a lot more rules and regulations in, which make drilling on private land more of a process as well. So we have it's about almost 3/4 of the wells are on private land, maybe even more. And we have the pipelines and so forth that connect the pipelines that go east and west. So the infrastructure's here, and so that makes it, I guess, appealing for developing oil and gas.
Well, what's interesting is, Colorado is in many ways a microcosm for the rest of the country. In terms of this push-pull or the tension between the tourism folks and the folks who think that all lands should be geared towards tourism. Yeah. And the folks who understand that there's got to be resource extraction that is done, and that some of these lands are managed and have been managed traditionally for resource utilization, right? We think about this. One of the things that I've talked about over the years is, you have people on the two coasts, New York or the East Coast, and folks in California. I know I'm backwards because I'm facing the camera there. So, folks on the East Coast and folks on the West Coast who see a place like Colorado or Montana or Utah or Nevada or Arizona or New Mexico or whatever, they see this, these lands should all be managed for recreation. And I think you probably get that out of Denver too. You get the folks in Denver who see the rest of Colorado as their playground. And so everything should be managed towards the tourism side of this. But you're a county commissioner. Talk about local governments and why it's important to have that mix of tourism, right? Which I guess in Colorado, it's not necessarily seasonal because you can do year-round things. But on the other hand, it has its ebbs and flows, but also the resource extraction side, which is sort of, I would think, your maybe not your bread and butter, but along those lines. Talk about that.
Well, there needs to be a balance. You're correct. And Colorado is a beautiful state. Our county is a beautiful state. Even with 11,000 wells, our county is a beautiful, beautiful county. And, we put a lot of resources into trying to protect our ability to have multiple use on public lands. And that is really because of the importance of the oil and gas industry, not just in jobs, but in the property taxes. I mean, if we're going to run our government, county government, if we're going to pay if our sheriff is going to have people here for protection and safety, and our fire departments are going to operate, and even in Rifle, Colorado, which is another municipality in Glenwood Springs, the hospital district is funded by property taxes, and 85% of their property taxes are coming from the oil and gas industry. So there's definitely a balancing act, and I'm in a county that is a purple. We have 3 Republican county commissioners, but we're a purple county, and so there is a balancing act. But you can't forget about those natural resources. They're so important, and we can't just leave them in the ground. I mean, there are people out there who say we can leave them in the ground, but believe me, this basin is going to be here for another millennia.
Right.
that we're going to be producing natural gas for the good of not just the United States, but the good of the world.
So let's talk about that. So you talk about it being a purple county, and you talk about the push-pull and the tensions in terms of how you have to negotiate with the folks who are on the county commission with you. But being the 7th largest county in Colorado and having 60% of it publicly owned, that means you've got a third partner in all of this in terms of this management. Talk about Garfield County and the federal government and the relationship there and how that interplay works.
Yeah, and I'll just say that it's not just Garfield County. It is probably many or most of the counties in the 11 western states that have a high percentage of public lands. And we don't receive property tax from the federal government. For those 2/3 of our land, they don't pay us any property tax. And so the use of their lands, multiple use, cattle grazing being one, timber, we do have logging in our county. We have a biomass electric plant to the east of us in Eagle County, and they log and chip aspen for their biomass. We have hunting is really big. We have one mine. We are, as I mentioned, oil and gas is really big. Recreation's big. Mountain biking, tourism on our rivers, our rafting, kayaking, and those are all managed by the federal government as well. So that multiple use and the ability to use those lands is extremely important. You take that away from us, and you take us from you make us a poor county if that is taken away. And there is a drive to do that.
And I want to get into the issue of the SEC thing in a second and how that's sort of emblematic of this. But what I want to talk about is, because in the counties that I've dealt with out west, some of the counties in Nevada, some of the counties in Arizona, some of the counties in New Mexico, it's making decisions that, in order to manage the county, like one county in Nevada, for instance, and this is before cell phones. So, that let's, keep that in mind there. But a county in Nevada needed to run a telephone line from the state highway to the county dump, or one of the county dump sites, and it was going to cross over 100 yards of federal land, and therefore they needed to get permission from Washington in order to do that. Do you run into things like that where you're dealing with where you're having to go and get permission from somebody that's 2,000 miles to the east in terms of getting stuff done?
Well, definitely. It's interesting how. Just with administrations that changes. I mean, we are in the middle of 6 EISs right now, planning decisions, and some Greater Sage Grouse is one that you mentioned. But there are others as well, and so and some of that unfortunately comes out of court decisions, and where a decision has been made, and then a group takes it. In one case, state of Colorado took it back to court, but an environmental group in another case, and so those are actually great. We put a lot of time and energy for a small staff. Put a lot of time and energy into those, and we do travel to Washington D.C. at times to plead our case.
Real quick on that, because and for the sage grouse issue is a huge one. This falls under the Endangered Species Act. We spent a lot of time on the show talking about the ESA. We had a conversation a couple weeks ago with a guy named Rob Gordon, who's done some really great research on the Endangered Species Act. Talk about staff time and staff constraints on working on things like the ESA and doing EISs and supplemental EISs, environmental impact statements. How much does this cost the county money when staff has to be dedicated to this, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It's we really have 3 or 4 staff members that work on these. However, we use outside resources as well. We hire a biologist to help us with the habitat and ecosystems. We hire economists to help us with how this will affect our economy as far as jobs and taxes and so forth. We've hired another group to help us with American Stewards of Liberty, have helped us with coordination and how do we coordinate with the federal government. And we've put together, with the Greater Sage Grouse, the maps were so awful. We spent our own money to go out and map the county, and then the rest of Northwest Colorado got into it, and we remapped, as counties remapped Northwest Colorado for Greater Sage Grouse habitat. And there was a large expense in that as well. So, yes, it's a lot of time and resources. And right now in the Greater Sage Grouse, we're just about ready for the draft EIS, and it's been a long process. I started as a commissioner in 2011, and I've been working on the Greater Sage Grouse EIS all that time.
It's getting back to your point about folks who want to see more and more federal land locked up, and this will be a good introduction to 30 by 30. But talk about the ESA, which isn't about species preservation. It's about land use and land use controls, which traditionally, of course, have been a municipal, a municipal decision, how you zone uses in your county or your town or whatever. Talk about the ESA as a land use statute, a federal land use statute, and then talk about it in the context of 30 by 30.
Well, the Endangered Species Act is for threatened and endangered species. However, with the Greater Sage Grouse, it's probably one of the biggest land grabs in Western United States history. It covers from North Dakota all the way to California. There's probably 550,000 Greater Sage Grouse, so they're not endangered or threatened. They call it sensitive. They're sensitive species, and so like in our county, the Greater Sage Grouse, they have a mating area called a lek, and those are mapped, and you can't have any drilling, no surface occupancy within a mile of those leks. So
wow,
and yet 98% of those public lands in Garfield County are already leased. So somebody was planning to drill on them. So there are so that's one way of using the Endangered Species Act to tie up land and stop oil and gas development.
It's interesting. We spend a lot of time. I spend a lot of time in my other sort of policy world, and a lot of time on the show talking about what they call what my colleague Wayne Cruz at the Competitive Enterprise Institute calls the whole of government approach to ideology. Right? You have an ideological goal in mind, and you use every tool at your disposal. In fact, this is perfect. This gets us now into. We'll get back into 30 by 30 in a second. This gets us into the victory yesterday. So, folks, I've spent a lot of time in recent weeks talking about the Securities and Exchange Commission and their effort to charter natural asset companies. Did my interview with Gabriella Hoffman from the Independent Women's Forum. That's gonna, and you've heard this by now. Literally, I did the interview with Gabby Hoffman. Did another interview the day after I interviewed Gabriella Hoffman. This decision comes out from the SEC that they're abandoning their rulemaking. Talk about natural asset companies from your perspective. Talk about it in terms of this idea of yet finding another way to get at the apple of shutting down drilling and things, and how that goes after what you guys are up to.
Well, I think there was a progression. It started out with 30 by 30 and America the Beautiful. And then it went in for the BLM, it went into a conservation ruling. The conservation ruling was that they could lease land for conservation. So basically lease land to not be productive. And then you saw the natural asset companies, which would have been then a vehicle to lease that land. At least that's how I perceived it. It just seemed like it was one step after another.
So, but it's a situation in which, in terms of how it would have played out in Garfield County, right? When we're talking about the public lands that are at work. We're talking about this issue of air rights to things. One of the aspects of the natural asset companies. This is the thing that got me, Tom, was this idea that a natural asset company could essentially put private land into a conservation easement without the assent, without the agreement of the landowner. I mean, that's to a place like Garfield County, right, where you're talking about private, lands that are being utilized for. It's already hard enough to do resource extraction on private lands. Now the idea that somebody could come in and put that land, that very productive, fertile, land for drilling into a conservation easement. Talk about that.
Well, that's just another way to stop oil and gas production.
Yeah.
And it's kind of devious in how you get there. These natural asset companies were going to be on the stock exchange, and they would generate money, but there would be no return. I've never heard of that. From the land. So you're conserving it, and it just shuts down in these counties with large public lands, or even in like Nebraska, where you have large ranches that potentially can take away acreage that's productive and supports jobs and supports the local people and provides schools and public safety. So it's really, I think it's deceiving and somewhat corrupt. Now I know somebody that's maybe is opposed to oil and gas. They see that differently, but believe me, as a county commissioner and somebody that has to work with our constituents and run a county, it's a little bit frightening.
Well, it gets down to this idea of somebody outside of Garfield County is going to be making these massive decisions that have a tremendous impact over the long-term health of the county. It's hard enough, right? And it's hard enough. I'm going to put words in your mouth, and I don't mean to, but I've seen this enough times. It's hard enough for leaders in rural counties to maintain their population, right? And I don't know, maybe it's different in Garfield County. You don't have people leaving the county. Maybe it's because you have the opportunities that are available to you, right? And it's a beautiful place to be. I mean, listen, I don't want to shortchange the fact, but you get someplace, XYZ township and I also don't want to take a big, I don't want to short sight North Dakota, because they're a beautiful place. Obviously, North Dakota is a beautiful state as well. But the point is, there are rural places in America that are having a hard time hanging on to young people because there's no career, there's no future. And you have folks who don't want to get into the tourism industry. They don't want to be they don't want to be a servant to the rich. They want to do for themselves. So, they could go and they could, work become an engineer and work in the natural gas industry, or be some kind of a civil engineer and work in the timber industry, or become an agronomist, or do those things. But if, there's no industry there to support it, right, then there's nothing that can be done. I mean, are you struggling with this issue and in Garfield County, the issue of, young people not wanting to stay necessarily, or is that not a thing for you guys?
We have, definitely our younger population moves out, but a lot of them also come back for the quality of life. And, the big issue, we are tourism driven. We're in the eastern end of our county. It's not just Glenwood Springs, but we are 45 minutes from Aspen, and Aspen imports 1,000 jobs a day into their county. Yeah, but you are right that, and that's because nobody can afford a house in Aspen.
That's the problem,
it's
right?
Middle class. But you're absolutely right that these jobs, these natural resource jobs, they're high paying for one thing. But also, even if you're a rancher, if you have to have the land, you have to have the lease on the private on public lands, and so it's a conundrum.
Well, actually, let's talk about that. I want to come, something actually. Let's start with this question that I have. We weren't even going to talk about this, but how are you guys dealing with the affordable housing issue? I mean, that's because I know that's a huge issue over in Vail, over there. As I said, we spent some time over there. How are you guys dealing with that?
It's really interesting on affordable housing, because it became a crisis during COVID, and you would have thought, well, why was it a crisis during COVID? And that was because so many people moved in that had cash, bought homes, and all of a sudden our inventory
dried up.
I mean, people are building apartments and they're immediately full, and so there's just it's an inventory issue. And the western end of our county, the housing is more affordable. And in the eastern end of our county, closer to Aspen, we're getting that whole Aspen effect where people can't afford to live here. So that creates another problem, which is traffic.
There's that movie. It's a terrible movie, but there was a movie, Aspen Extreme, that came out in the 90s. I remember this. And the two skiers in it, they moved from Detroit out to Aspen, and they wind up living literally in a caboose of a train, like an abandoned caboose that's sort of off in the middle of nowhere. But let's shift our gears back to this, the SEC and the natural asset companies issue. Okay. Because you made a point, and I think we glossed over it, which is the issue of multiple use, right? Again, you have so much public land in Garfield County that is used and utilized, whether it's for forest or for range or some of it small amount for drilling or whatever. It's utilized for resource utilization. That's why it's managed by the BLM as opposed to the National Park Service. That's why it's managed by the Department of Agriculture as opposed to the National Park Service. But one of the problems of the natural asset companies is they gain rights to the air and water, and all of a sudden they can start dictating who gets to use the resources and how. Isn't that right? Yeah,
that's right. When do your public lands no longer are no longer public? Yeah. And so let's say somebody leases a large portion of land, and you're a local guy and you used to go up hunting up there. Well, now potentially you can't hunt on that land.
Right.
You can't even, maybe it might be trespassing if you go on a hike on that land.
Wow.
And so I mean, it's conservation, and wilderness areas are a little bit different because wilderness areas, you can't drive on them or anything, but you can at least walk through them.
Sure.
They're really not managed. And I would imagine that these conservation areas will become even, they'll go back to their natural state. And it's just not, so we lose all kinds of opportunity. We lose quality of life. We lose jobs. We lose tax base. And that's how you make the Western United States counties that are rural, poor counties.
And it's a situation where, yes, the SEC pulled the proposal yesterday. They said, okay, we're not doing. Literally, just so you understand, Tom, I was 13 pages into my draft comments, was literally about to write the conclusion and get it formatted to be submitted when I got an email from a colleague saying, hey, SEC has pulled the rulemaking, which, by the way, is the second time that's happened to me in the last 10 days. But just because it's been pulled, that doesn't mean this goes away. As you've pointed out, we've talked about the whole of government approach. There's more than one way to skin this cat. There is a constant threat to the multiple use on lands in Garfield County. Talk about your concerns there.
Well, there's a constant threat. Well, first of all, I think next thing we're going to have to look at from natural asset companies is going to be the natural capital accounts, which the Biden administration put in, saying that we want to know what the assets are, the natural assets are of all this public land. So that's something else we're going to have to watch.
It's astounding to me because you can talk to folks in the property rights. I've been calling for an inventory of federal-owned land for almost 20 years now. In fact, if not, this may be the 20th anniversary of the first time I called for a national inventory of public lands. All of a sudden now, because they're trying to figure out a way to monetize it for their cronyist friends, now we're going to finally get this kind of a listing, aren't we?
Yeah, and they want to build the balance sheet. But to get back to your
please,
question,
I'm sorry.
I mean, we're under attack primarily by climate change activists and radical environmentalists, and it's been going on for 30 years or so. It's people wanting to move cattle off of public land, close down public land for drilling, really more land for preservation, and it's an attack. It's what it is. It's an attack, and for those people that believe in multiple use and using the public lands as they were designed through FLPMA, it's really concerning.
Yeah, for those of you who are the uninitiated, FLPMA is the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, which lays out sort of how these lands are supposed to be managed. The other thing that it does, by the way, FLPMA, passed in 1979, is that it shifted When all the states sort of west of the Rockies became states following the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, folks, they entered the Union with these state enabling acts, and the federal government agreed that they were going to dispose of all of the unappropriated public land within the state's boundaries. They didn't. So that's why there are huge swatches of public land in most of these counties. The Federal Land Policy and Management Act flipped the concept of the federal government's duty to dispose to the duty to retain. So now they've gone us much, much further. Right now, while it was already very difficult to gain ownership of federally owned land, now it's difficult to utilize, to rent that federally owned land for resource utilization. I may have butchered that, Tom. Did I do okay with that?
No, I think you did. You really covered that pretty well. We just need to know that the National Forest Service with the forest reserves came into effect in the 1890s. And I don't know how I would have felt about that back in 1890.
Sure.
But the Land Bureau, which disposed of lands, really switched with FLPMA, I think, in 1976 or so.
Yeah, something like that. Yes.
And that went from, and I remember, being in my life where the last homesteading was done up in Alaska, and that was just prior to FLPMA coming into place. And since then, the Bureau of Land Management now is manages and is the custodian of public lands.
And
they're larger than the Forest Service.
And people need to pay greater attention to it, especially as you said, right? Given the changes in administration and who's managing them, all kinds of stuff is being done here. Let's talk a little bit about you for a minute, because I want to come back to this. So what made you decide you owned a snow resort? Was it a ski resort? Snowboarding resort?
A really small ski resort outside of Glenwood Springs called Sunlight Mountain Resort.
Okay.
Just 3 chairlifts, but wonderful local resort.
That's not where the amusement park is high on the mountain, is it? Or is it a different mountain?
It's south of Glenwood. So you can see it. You can see it from the amusement park and vice versa.
Nice.
And you go up the tram on the amusement park.
Yeah, we didn't go up there on that trip, but some point in time. Sorry, go ahead. So what made you make the decision? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Excuse me. So,
please.
As a ski resort, we wanted to do some development in the base area, and we found out how difficult that was. And through my peers, I was asked if I wanted to run for county commissioner. And I talked to my wife, and she said, "Yeah, go for it." And she's the decision maker there. So nice. I ran, and I did have quite a bit of name recognition because I was the general manager of the ski resort, and that was in 2010. I'm in my 4th term. I'm actually the junior commissioner, so the 3 commissioners have been there. I'm junior by 2 years.
Okay.
And so this will be my last term. I'm going to, which will end in 3 years.
It's one of those things where I have a real affinity for the small ski resorts. I'm not a great skier, and I'm a terrible skier. My wife, on the other hand, grew up on skis, but I remember as a teenager going to my first small ski resort, as you said, a couple of chairlifts, not the steepest of hills in the Catskills in New York. Again, not big mountains, but just having the best time. It was so relaxed, and there's something to be said for that, to be able to go someplace. And I would think that, again, around Glenwood Springs, it must be there's got to be something spectacular to having that there.
Yeah, I mean, it affects the quality of life for our local community. We are a local resort, although 50% of our customers are tourists that come from either the Front Range or out of state, sometimes from around the world. And it's a fun resort. It's kind of like, it's old. Somebody would call it old school because we have the slower chairlifts and so forth.
I love it. All right, next question. Can you make it easier to get to Doc Holliday's grave? Because that's not an easy walk to do.
That's a little steep getting up there, and
I mean, I don't know.
I don't think we're putting in any escalators.
There you go. No chairlift to Doc Holliday's grave.
You have to walk up, just walk and rest, and maybe a few more benches. along the way.
I did not drag my kids up there with me, but I did drag my wife to go up to Doc Holliday's grave because, again, I'm a huge Doc Holliday fan there. Then the Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame. How did this come about?
Yeah, I'm not a ski racer, so I've skied with some really great skiers, but I'm not a ski racer, so it's not from that. It's really from as soon as I got out of college, I worked at Arapahoe Basin, which is closer to Denver.
Sure.
My uncle was the majority owner of that resort and the manager. And so I worked for him. And so I've really been in the ski business in Colorado since 1973.
Wow.
And so, it was an honor from my peers to operationally to vote me into the Colorado Ski Hall of Fame. And it truly is an honor.
That is just great. So you're not a ski racer. So, and I asked this, no. So when you have spare time, and it doesn't sound like you have a ton of spare time, but when you're not county commissioning, when you're not engaging in other sort of business stuff, what are you up to? How are you spending your free time?
Well, I still work up at Sunlight.
Okay.
I'm semi-retired, so I spend some free time up there. I do ski and I do hike. I like to, and then just, we have a wonderful house, and I like to garden and work around the house as well. Nice. So those are primarily it. Oh, and I have 5 grandchildren who all live in this community. So that is a huge part of my life now too.
All right. So we've talked about a couple of the different things in Garfield County, and listen, I'm taking personal privilege here because this is what I love. I love talking about this stuff. We've talked about a couple of the sites. Maybe it's on the list we've already talked about. You have one day to spend in Garfield County, and we're talking about from the Glenwood Canyon to the Utah state line. What's the one thing you need to see in Garfield County?
Well,
or is there not one?
There's many. I mean, I've got some backcountry places to go where you can go and see. You have to drive in for a ways on Jeep roads to see a 100-foot waterfall. Or we have the Devil's Causeway in the north part of the county, which is a real narrow little path you have to walk on. But if you're here in Glenwood just for the hot springs and the rafting, the fly fishing, the biking, mountain biking, or biking through the canyon, those are all wonderful things to do. And I need to also throw in a pitch for skiing in the wintertime.
Here.
Ski and then go soak.
I'm telling you, Tom, I'm coming back. We had just such a marvelous trip out to Colorado this past summer. We're going to come back over. We're going to come over, stay in Garfield County, and come and see you. Thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Andrew, for the interview. And I just hope a lot of people get to watch this. And
absolutely. Thank you. So that was Tom Jankovsky. He is the commissioner of Garfield County, Colorado. And we're so glad he could join us today. This is the close of yet another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. As I've said, if you're watching us on YouTube, please go and check us out on wherever you find your fine podcast content. If you're listening to us on one of those platforms, come and check us out on YouTube. Let your friends know, let your family members know, leave us a like, leave us a review, and please subscribe. Thanks a lot, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your lunch.
This has been the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast, hosted by Andrew Langer. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.